Alone and struggling to raise her child, a young woman accepts a job as a nanny without imagining what awaits her. Upon arriving at the mansion, her heart stops. Standing before her is the man she loved and who disappeared 7 years ago. But he doesn't recognize her, and worse, he has a child the same age as hers. Determined to uncover the truth, she plunges into a dark mystery that will change their lives forever. If this story interests you, subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. The July sun beat down on the sand of Myrtle Beach, but Sarah barely felt the heat. Her brown eyes were lost on the horizon as she watched her son, Ethan, 7 years old, building sandcastles near the water. The boy had the same dark curls as his father, Jack, whom fate had taken from her so cruelly. 7 years had passed since Jack's inexplicable disappearance, leaving her alone and pregnant, without even knowing she was expecting a child. Sarah adjusted the straw hat, a gift Ethan had chosen for her on her last birthday. At 28, she still maintained the same determination that had helped her overcome the most difficult moments. She had worked as a private tutor, done translation gigs, studied at night, and finally managed to establish herself as a teacher at a private school. Her life revolved around Ethan, her only family since her parents moved to Florida. "Mom, look, how tall it is," Ethan shouted, proud of his sand construction. Sarah smiled, getting up to admire her son's work. At that moment, her cell phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello," she answered hesitantly. "Mrs. Sarah Thompson?" The female voice on the other end sounded formal. "This is from the Premium Employment Agency. We have a proposal that might interest you." Sarah frowned. She didn't remember signing up with any agency recently. "There must be some mistake. I didn't... Actually, your referral came through the school where you work," the woman interrupted. "We're looking for a private tutor for a child. The salary is 3 times your current one, with housing included in a high-end gated community in Newport, Rhode Island." Sarah's heart raced. That amount would completely change her life and Ethan's. They could finally move out of the small, rented apartment, have more comfort, maybe even save for his college fund in the future. "The family would like to interview you today, if possible," the woman continued. "It's a unique opportunity." Sarah looked at Ethan, who was now decorating his castle with seashells. The beach was full of families, the sun shining brightly, and a gentle breeze brought the characteristic smell of the sea. It seemed like a sign from destiny. "What time would the interview be?" she asked, still uncertain. "At 3 in the afternoon. I can send the address by message. It's a mansion in the Ocean View Estates." Sarah checked her watch. 11:40 a.m. She would have time to take Ethan to lunch with her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who always looked after him when necessary. The old lady had a special fondness for the boy and had offered to help other times. "All right, I'll be there," she replied, trying to contain the anxiety in her voice. After hanging up, Sarah called Ethan to pack up his toys. As she helped him clean the sand off his feet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. In the last 7 years, she had learned to trust her intuition. During the journey home, Ethan talked animatedly about his plans to build an even bigger castle next weekend. Sarah listened attentively, but her mind wandered to the mysterious interview. Why would such a rich family look for a teacher through an agency? And why the rush to interview her on the same day? After leaving Ethan with Mrs. Johnson, who welcomed him with her traditional chocolate cake, Sarah carefully chose her most formal outfit, a discreet navy blue dress and black low-heeled shoes. As she got ready, she found, at the bottom of the drawer, the only photo she kept of Jack. It was slightly yellowed, folded at the corners, but his smile remained as alive as in her memories. "Give me strength," she whispered to the photo before putting it away again. The journey to Newport was smooth, but her heart beat faster as she approached the gated community. The address led her to a huge golden gate where a security guard was already waiting for her. After identifying herself, she was led down an avenue of royal palm trees to a mansion that looked like it was straight out of a movie. The Mediterranean-style building, all in shades of beige and terracotta, stood majestically against the blue sky. A fountain with marble angels decorated the front garden, and Sarah could see the ocean in the background, completing the dreamlike landscape. A middle-aged housekeeper received her at the door, introducing herself as Martha. "The lady of the house is in the office waiting," she informed, leading Sarah through a hall decorated with works of art and antiques. Each step through the mansion's corridors increased her unease. The walls were decorated with classic paintings and family photographs, but Sarah avoided looking at them, focusing on maintaining her composure. The cold air conditioning contrasted with the heat she felt inside. Martha stopped in front of an engraved wooden door and knocked softly. "The candidate is here, Ma'am," she announced. "Come in," replied a female voice from inside the room. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her dress and turned the doorknob. The office was spacious, with a privileged view of the ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows. She was so focused on appearing professional that initially she didn't notice the male figure standing with his back to her, observing the landscape. "Welcome, Sarah," said the woman sitting behind an imposing mahogany desk. "I'm Elizabeth Blackwell, and this is my husband." The man turned around, and Sarah's world stopped. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Sarah's feet. There, less than 10 feet away, stood Jack. Her Jack. The same face, just a little more mature, with some grey hairs at the temples that didn't exist before. His green eyes, which had so often made her lose herself in dreams, now looked at her, with polite indifference. "Jack Blackwell," he introduced himself with a cordial smile, extending his hand. There was no sign of recognition in his gaze. Sarah felt her blood freeze in her veins. With superhuman effort, she managed to extend her trembling hand and accept the greeting. Her skin still reacted to his touch, even after so many years, even though he seemed like a complete stranger. "Please, have a seat," Elizabeth indicated. "A leather armchair." Her voice was soft, but there was something unsettling in her gaze. "We've seen your references from the school where you work. They're impressive." Sarah sat down, trying to control the storm of emotions that threatened to overflow. Jack returned to his position near the window, as if the ocean view was more interesting than the interview. "Our situation is a bit delicate," Elizabeth continued, leafing through some papers on the desk. "Our son Lucas is 7 years old and needs special attention. He's different from other children." "Different how?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice surprisingly firm. "Lucas is extremely intelligent but has difficulty concentrating," Jack replied, turning around again. "He also has some socialization problems. The teachers at the regular school can't handle his temperament." Sarah felt her heart tighten. 7 years old. The same age as Ethan. The coincidences were too disturbing to be ignored. "May I meet him?" she asked, needing to confirm her suspicions. Elizabeth and Jack exchanged a quick glance before she pressed a button on the intercom. "Martha, can you bring Lucas, please?" The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. Sarah discreetly observed the office, noting the absence of family photographs. There were only abstract paintings and a small bronze sculpture on the fireplace. The door opened, and Sarah had to hold onto the armchair's arm not to collapse. Lucas was identical to Ethan. The same dark curls, the same face shape, even the small birthmark near his right ear. The only difference was in his posture. While Ethan was outgoing and cheerful, Lucas seemed withdrawn, almost fearful. "Lucas, this is Mrs. Sarah," Elizabeth introduced, her tone artificially sweet. "She might be your new teacher." The boy looked at her curiously. "Do you like building things?" he asked timidly. The question made Sarah swallow hard. Ethan was obsessed with building, whether it was sand, Lego, or building blocks. "Yes, very much," she replied with a gentle smile, "especially castles." Lucas's eyes brightened for a moment, but soon retreated behind a mask of shyness when Elizabeth softly cleared her throat. "Darling, why don't you show Mrs. Sarah your playroom?" Elizabeth suggested. "Martha will accompany you." As she followed Lucas through the mansion's corridors, Sarah struggled to organize her thoughts. The similarities were impossible to ignore. But how? Why? And why didn't Jack recognize her? The playroom was a spacious and colorful environment, but there was something artificial about its impeccable organization. Lucas walked straight to a table where several Lego constructions were arranged. "I made them all by myself," he said. with restrained pride, showing a detailed replica of the Empire State Building. Sarah approached to examine the construction, noting the complexity of the work. "It's impressive, Lucas. You have a real gift. Do you have children?" Martha suddenly asked, her tone too casual to be natural. "Yes, a boy," Sarah replied, deciding to be honest. "He's also 7 years old." Martha slightly furrowed her brow, but her face soon returned to a neutral expression. "What an interesting coincidence," she commented, exchanging a significant look with Lucas. After a few minutes of observing Lucas's constructions, they were called back to the office. Sarah noticed that the boy became quieter during the return, as if he had been reminded of some unspoken rule. "So, Sarah," Elizabeth began as soon as they sat down again, "when could you start?" The question caught her by surprise. There had been no discussion about her qualifications, methodology, or previous experience. "I would need to organize some personal matters first," she replied cautiously. "Maybe in a week." "Perfect," Elizabeth smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Martha will show you to your quarters. We hope the room is adequate." Jack, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "I'm sure Lucas will benefit greatly from your lessons," he said, and for a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. As she followed Martha to see the room, Sarah felt her heart heavy. Something was deeply wrong in this house, in this family. The coincidences were too disturbing to be ignored. The room intended for her was luxurious, with a private balcony facing the ocean, but Sarah barely registered the details of the decor. Her mind was focused on a single mission: to uncover the truth behind Jack's disappearance and his apparent memory loss. "Dinner is served at 7, Martha informed, turning to leave. "Oh, and Mrs. Sarah, welcome to the Blackwell family." There was something in the housekeeper's tone that made Sarah shudder. As soon as she was alone, she sat on the king-size bed and allowed the tears, until then contained, to finally fall. Her instinct screamed that she had just entered a complex web of secrets and lies, but now there was no turning back. For Jack, for Lucas, and especially for Ethan, she needed to uncover the truth. The first week at the Blackwell mansion proved to be an exercise in self-control for Sarah. Every corridor, every room held small details that didn't fit, like pieces of a puzzle deliberately scattered to confuse. During lessons with Lucas, Sarah discovered that the boy was extraordinarily similar to Ethan, not only in appearance but in his gestures and manners. The way he furrowed his brow when concentrating, the way he bit his lip when anxious, even his fascination with complex constructions, everything was identical. "Teacher Sarah," Lucas called during an afternoon of studies in the library, "why do you sometimes look at me that way?" Sarah adjusted her posture in the chair, surprised by the boy's perceptiveness. "What way, Lucas?" "As if you were looking for something," he replied, his green eyes, the same as Jack's, fixed on her. "Is it because I look like someone you do?" Before Sarah could answer, Elizabeth entered the library. Her usual smile was in place, but there was something predatory in her movements. "Lucas, dear, it's time for your medicine." Sarah watched with growing concern as Elizabeth administered a pill to the boy. It was the third different medication she had seen Lucas take in less than a week. "They're vitamins," Elizabeth explained, noticing Sarah's look. "Lucas has always been a fragile child." Later that same night, Sarah took advantage of the mansion's silence to investigate. With silent steps, she headed to Elizabeth's office. The door was locked, but Sarah had noticed where Martha kept the spare key during cleaning. The office was bathed in twilight, illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the windows. Sarah turned on only the small desk lamp, trying to minimize the chances of being discovered. Her hands trembled as she opened the drawers, looking for any information about Jack or Lucas. In the third drawer, she found a folder marked with the boy's name. Inside, there were several medical reports, all signed by Dr. Richard Carter. What caught her attention, however, was a series of prescriptions for potent psychiatric medications, very different from the vitamins Elizabeth had mentioned. "Looking for something specific?" Martha's voice made Sarah freeze. The housekeeper was standing at the door, her face partially hidden in the shadows. Was just looking for Lucas's school planning. Sarah lied, trying to keep her voice steady. Martha entered the office, closing the door behind her. You know, Sarah, you remind me very much of someone. A young woman I met a few years ago, equally curious about things that were none of her business. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Martha's voice that suggested she knew much more than she let on. What happened to her? Sarah asked, gathering courage. Let's say she learned the importance of staying in her place, Martha replied, approaching the desk. Some secrets, Sarah, are like bitter medicine. It's better not to mess with them. At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Martha quickly picked up a book from the shelf. I was just showing Mrs. Sarah where we keep the extra teaching material, she said aloud, as Elizabeth opened the door. At 11 p.m., Elizabeth questioned, her gaze alternating between the two women. We lost track of time discussing tomorrow's program, Sarah forced a smile. Lucas showed interest in medieval history, so fascinating, Elizabeth cut in dryly. But I believe we all need to rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. On the way back to her room, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Martha's words. The housekeeper was a crucial piece in this mystery, but was she an ally or just another guardian of the Blackwell's secrets? Lying in her bed, Sarah took out her cell phone and typed a message to Mrs. Johnson, who was taking care of Ethan. How is he? The answer came almost immediately. Sleeping like an angel. He made another Lego castle today, said it's for you. Sarah held back tears. The longing for Ethan was like physical pain, but now she was sure she was in the right place. Lucas needed help, and the more she discovered about the Blackwell mansion, the more convinced she became that the boy was in danger. A noise in the hallway caught her attention. Through the door crack, she saw Jack walking towards the west wing of the mansion, an area Martha had said was restricted. He seemed disoriented, almost sleepwalking. Elizabeth followed him closely, firmly holding his arm while whispering something in his ear. Sarah waited until they disappeared down the corridor before silently leaving her room. She followed in the direction they had taken, but a firm hand on her shoulder stopped her. It's not wise to wander around the house at night, Mrs. Sarah, said Martha, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. The walls have ears, and some paths are better left unexplored. Forced to return to her room, Sarah spent hours tossing and turning in bed, her mind a storm of theories and possibilities. One thing was clear. Elizabeth was not just the dedicated wife she appeared to be, and the medicines she gave to Lucas and Jack had a much darker purpose than vitamins or supplements. The next morning during breakfast, Sarah noticed that Jack looked paler than usual, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, as if he were under the effect of some strong medication. Lucas, on the other hand, played distractedly with his food until his eyes met Sarah's and he smiled, the same sweet and sincere smile as Ethan's. The weekend arrived with unexpected news. Elizabeth needed to travel on business. Sarah saw the opportunity to investigate more freely, but she also noticed how Jack seemed more lucid in his wife's absence. During Saturday's breakfast, for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, Jack initiated a spontaneous conversation with Sarah. You know, I've been having strange dreams lately, he commented, while Lucas played in the garden. Always with a beach and a pregnant woman crying. It seems so real. Sarah felt her heart race. And what happens in these dreams? I can't remember clearly. He frowned, confused. It's like trying to hold water in my hands. The more I try to grasp the memories, the more they slip away. Martha, who was serving more coffee, let Jack's cup tremble slightly. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but Sarah noticed that the housekeeper seemed nervous. Maybe it's just stress, Martha intervened quickly. You've been working too hard. You didn't forget to take your vitamin this morning, did you? Jack shook his head, still thoughtful. I didn't take it. Actually, I've been feeling better without it. Sarah observed that Martha exchanged a worried look with someone behind her. As she turned, she saw Dr. Richard Carter, the doctor whose name was on the prescription she had found, standing at the dining room door. Jack, good thing I found you, said the doctor, his voice too artificial. We need to do those routine exams I mentioned. But we didn't schedule anything for today, Jack protested. It's just preventive, the doctor insisted, approaching, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It won't take long. Sarah watched helplessly as Jack was practically dragged to the office. Minutes later, Dr. Carter came out alone, putting a used syringe in his lab coat pocket. He just needs to rest a bit, the doctor explained upon noticing Sarah's look. Too much work, you know how it is. When everyone had left, Sarah took the opportunity to go up to Jack and Elizabeth's bedroom. The door was unlocked, which was unusual. Inside, everything was impeccably organized, except for a partially open drawer in the nightstand. Her heart almost stopped when she saw the contents, dozens of bottles of controlled medications, some with labels in other languages. There was also a diary written in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. March 12th, Jay started having lapses again. Increased the dosage as directed. I can't allow him to remember. Not after everything I've done to have him. April 15th, L asked questions about his biological mother today. Martha suggested increasing the mild sedatives, but I fear it might affect his development. I need to find another solution. June 20th. The private detective is getting too curious. M said she'll take care of it. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, but when I look at them, I know it was worth it. They're mine now, forever. Sarah photographed some pages. With her cell phone, her hands shaking. As she was about to put the diary away, an envelope fell out of it. It was an old birth certificate with a handwritten note. Original, keep safe. The document showed that Lucas had been born in the same hospital as Ethan on the same day. But there was something more. A detail that made Sarah bring her hand to her mouth to stifle a scream. On the certificate, it stated, twins, natural. Birth and just below the parents' names, Sarah Thompson and Jack Anderson. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened. Sarah barely had time to hide the envelope when Martha entered. Mrs. Sarah, Lucas is asking for you, said the housekeeper, her eyes scanning the room. Any problem? No, I was looking for a book Jack mentioned. Earlier, she lied, trying to control her voice. Martha smiled, but there was something predatory in her expression. Curious. Mr. Jack rarely comments on books, especially when he's resting. Sarah felt a chill. Martha knew she was lying, but for some reason she didn't report her. Instead, the housekeeper approached and whispered, "Not all allies are obvious, just as not all enemies are evident. Be careful with your next actions." Before Sarah could process the meaning of those words, they heard Lucas scream in the garden. Both ran there, finding the boy fallen near the swing. "I saw her! The woman in the photo!" exclaimed Lucas, pointing to the bushes. "She was watching me!" "What photo?" "Dear," asked Sarah, helping him up. "The one hidden in Dad's drawer. He looks at it when he thinks no one is watching," Lucas replied, his green eyes wide. "The lady from the beach." Martha turned pale. Sarah felt her heart leap. Jack still kept her photo, the same one they had taken together on the beach, 7 years ago. Somewhere inside him the memory still existed, struggling to emerge. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to act, and fast. She took out her cell phone and typed a message to a number she hadn't used in a long time. "David, I need your help. Do you still work as a private detective?" The meeting with David happened in a discreet coffee shop in downtown Newport. Sarah had managed to leave the mansion with the excuse of buying teaching materials, aware of Martha's gaze that followed her to the gate. "You haven't changed a bit," said David, now a middle-aged man with grey hair at his temples. He was the first detective Sarah had sought when Jack disappeared 7 years ago. "But you've discovered a lot," Sarah replied, sliding an envelope across the table with the photos of Elizabeth's diary and the birth certificate. David examined the documents with professional attention, his eyebrows gradually rising. "This is much more serious than we imagined," he murmured. "Elizabeth Blackwell. That name sounds familiar." He opened his folder and took out some papers. "In recent years, I've been investigating cases of irregular adoptions in luxury hospitals. There's a pattern: rich families, missing children, forged documents, and a name that appears frequently: New Dawn Institute." "What's that?" asked Sarah, leaning in to get a better look at the documents. "A private clinic specializing in experimental treatments for trauma and memory loss," David made air quotes. Elizabeth Blackwell is on the board of directors. Sarah felt a shiver. The medicines she gives to Jack and Lucas probably come from there, David completed. I need a few days to investigate further, but Sarah, he hesitated, you need to be extremely careful. These people are dangerous and have powerful connections. Back at the mansion, Sarah found Lucas more agitated than usual. The boy pulled her to his room as soon as he saw her. Look what I found, he whispered, showing an old box under the bed. Inside were old photographs, postcards, and, to Sarah's surprise, a diary with Jack's handwriting. Where did you find this? She asked, carefully leafing through the pages. In the attic. Aunt Martha was cleaning up there and dropped it. She doesn't know I took it. Lucas smiled, proud of his small act of rebellion. Sarah began to read, her heart racing with each word. January 14th. Something is wrong. I have strange dreams about a beach, a pregnant woman. Elizabeth says it's just stress, but why can't I remember how we met? Why don't I have photos of us together before the wedding? January 28th. I found an old photo today hidden in a book. A woman smiles at the camera. We're on a beach. I can't remember her, but my heart aches when I look at her face. Elizabeth caught me with the photo and was furious. She said it was just a fan from when I was a model. But why keep a fan's photo? February 5th. The medicines make me confused. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and don't know where I am. Elizabeth says I've had sleepwalking episodes since the accident, but what accident? Why can't I remember? A noise in the hallway made Sarah quickly put away the diary. Martha entered the room, her eyes assessing the scene. Lucas, dear, time for your medicine, she announced, but her voice had a different tone than usual. I'm not feeling well today, Aunt Martha, Lucas protested. These medicines make me drowsy. Sarah noticed a subtle change in the housekeeper's expression. Maybe, Martha began hesitantly, maybe you can skip today's dose, but don't tell your mother. After Lucas fell asleep, Sarah found a note in her room. Tomorrow, 3 a.m. attic. Come alone, M. That night, Sarah could barely sleep. Her phone vibrated with a message from David. Discovered something big. Elizabeth is not who she says she is. Her real name is... The message was interrupted by a noise coming from the hallway. Sarah quickly put away her phone and pretended to be asleep when she heard footsteps approaching her room. Through half-closed eyelids, she saw Dr. Carter pass by, carrying his medical bag. Minutes later, she heard altered voices coming from Jack's room. She silently approached the door. He's starting to remember, the doctor was saying. The medications are no longer being as effective. Then increase the dose. Elizabeth's voice sounded hysterical. I can't lose everything now, not after so long. More sedatives can cause permanent damage, the doctor warned. And there's that new teacher. She asks too many questions. Let me handle her, Elizabeth replied, her voice now dangerously calm. No one is going to destroy the family I built. No one. Sarah silently returned to her room, her heart pounding. The meeting with Martha in the attic could be a trap, but it could also be her only chance to discover the whole truth. She looked at the clock, 11:45 p.m. In a few hours, she would know who she could really trust. The clock marked 2:57 a.m. when Sarah silently climbed the stairs to the attic. Each wooden step seemed to want to betray her with treacherous creaks. The mansion slept, but Sarah felt as if the very walls were watching her. Martha was already waiting, a small flashlight illuminating her aged face. For the first time, Sarah saw vulnerability in the housekeeper's eyes. You're late, Martha whispered, closing the attic door behind them. We have little time. Elizabeth installed cameras in almost every room, but here is still safe. Why are you helping me now? Sarah asked, still distrustful. Martha sighed, sitting down in an old armchair covered by a sheet. Because I can't carry this weight anymore. I was there, Sarah, on the day it all began. The housekeeper took an old box from under some blankets and opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and yellowed documents. Elizabeth can't have children, Martha began. This obsession with forming a perfect family consumed her for years. She met Jack at a rehabilitation clinic where he was recovering from a car accident. He was confused, vulnerable. What accident? Sarah interrupted. Jack never had any accident. Exactly. Martha picked up a newspaper clipping. The accident was forged. Elizabeth was the director of the New Dawn Institute at the time. They were developing an experimental program of memory reconditioning for traumatized people. But the real experiments, she shuddered, were much more sinister. Sarah took the clipping. The headline spoke about the disappearance of several people who coincidentally had passed through the institute. Elizabeth saw Jack in a magazine, Martha continued. He was a model at the time, was engaged, his fiancée was pregnant. Elizabeth became obsessed. She used her contacts to discover everything about his life. When she learned about the twin pregnancy, Martha paused, her hands trembling. She saw her chance to have the family she always wanted. So she planned everything? Sarah could barely breathe. The kidnapping, the fake accident, the memory-erasing medications. Yes, but she couldn't get both children that day. Only Lucas. You managed to escape with Ethan. Sarah sat down, stunned by the revelations. Why did you never say anything? Elizabeth has information that could destroy me. Martha lowered her eyes. I worked at the hospital when the twins were born. She blackmailed me to help her, threatened to reveal some mistakes from my past. At first I thought I was just helping a desperate woman have a family. When I realized the true extent of her plans, it was too late. A noise downstairs made them both freeze. Martha quickly put away the documents. There's more, she whispered. The Institute, they don't just do memory experiments. There's an entire network of powerful people involved in illegal adoptions. Elizabeth is just one piece of something much bigger. That's why the detective disappeared 7 years ago, Sarah murmured, the pieces falling into place. He must have discovered something. David Reynolds, Martha nodded. He got too close to the truth. Elizabeth arranged for him to be removed, but he survived and now he's back. More noises, now closer. Martha pushed a folder into Sarah's hands. Here's everything, institute records, medical files, fake documents. But be careful. Elizabeth has eyes and ears everywhere, and she's not alone. Dr. Carter, he's just another puppet, Martha cut in. The real power is in the hands of the Institute's board. Influential people, judges, businessmen. Elizabeth helps them get the children they want, and in return... The attic door creaked. Martha pushed Sarah behind an old wardrobe, just in time to see Dr. Carter enter. Martha, what are you doing here at this hour? He asked, suspicious. Insomnia, the housekeeper responded naturally. Sometimes I come here to organize the old stuff. Helps me sleep. The doctor seemed unconvinced, but didn't insist. Elizabeth wants to see you. Now, after they left, Sarah waited a few minutes before returning to her room. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Martha's revelations explained a lot, but also opened doors to even more disturbing questions. In her room, she quickly examined the documents in the folder. There were records of dozens of children adopted through the Institute, all with similar stories. Parents who suffered accidents, erased memories, forged documents. One photo in particular caught her attention. Elizabeth, younger, next to a group of well-dressed people. The caption read, Board of Directors, New Dawn Institute 2015. Among the faces, Sarah recognized famous businessmen, a judge, 2 influential politicians. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from David. Got access to the Institute's files. You won't believe what I found. Meet tomorrow? Sarah quickly replied, yes, same place, same time. She carefully put away the folder and lay down, but sleep didn't come. Through the window, she saw lights turning on in Elizabeth's office. Shadows moved behind the curtains, and altered voices reached her room, muffled. She knows too much. Elizabeth's voice sounded furious. We need to act now. Sarah hugged her pillow, her heart racing. Tomorrow would be a decisive day. With the evidence she now had and David's information, she could finally expose the whole truth. But first, she needed to ensure that Lucas and Jack were safe. What she didn't know was that Elizabeth also had her own plans for the next day. And they didn't include leaving Sarah alive to tell her story. The dawn brought a heavy atmosphere to the mansion. Sarah immediately noticed the subtle changes. 2 new security guards in the garden, the library curtains closed against custom, and an abnormal silence in the usually busy corridors. During breakfast, Elizabeth seemed strangely excited. "I have a surprise for you, Lucas," she announced, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We're going on a trip this afternoon. That boarding school in Switzerland I mentioned, they have a spot for you." Lucas turned pale, his fork falling with a clang on the plate. "But I don't want to go, Mum. I like the classes with Teacher Sarah." "It's not a matter of wanting, dear." Elizabeth's voice had a cutting tone beneath the artificial sweetness. "Everything is already arranged." Sarah felt her blood freeze. It was an obvious maneuver to get Lucas away before she could reveal the truth. Her eyes met Martha's, who subtly shook her head in warning. "What about Jack?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Does he agree with this sudden decision?" "My husband is not feeling well today," Elizabeth replied. "Dr. Carter needed to increase his medication. He needs absolute rest." Sarah realized what wasn't being said. Jack was probably sedated somewhere in the mansion, prevented from interfering with Elizabeth's plans. After breakfast, Sarah sent an urgent message to David. "Elizabeth plans to take Lucas today. We need to act now." The response came almost immediately. "Don't go to the scheduled meeting. It's a trap. I have the necessary evidence. I'm contacting trusted authorities. Keep Lucas close." During the morning lessons, Sarah tried to maintain the appearance of normality, but her heart was racing. Lucas seemed to sense her unease. "Teacher," he whispered during an exercise, "I don't want to go to Switzerland. I've been having strange dreams lately, about a boy just like me. I think I have a brother." Sarah held back tears. "Lucas, I need you to trust me. Do you promise not to go anywhere without telling me?" The boy nodded, his green eyes, so similar to Jack's, shining with wisdom beyond his years. At lunchtime, Martha appeared in the library with a grave expression. "Elizabeth moved up the trip. The helicopter arrives in an hour." "Helicopter?" Sarah felt panic rising. "I thought they were going by plane." "She doesn't trust airports anymore." Martha lowered her voice. "She suspects you've alerted the authorities." "The pilot is someone from the Institute." Sarah needed to act quickly. She took out her cell phone to alert David, but there was no signal. "The internet is down too," Martha informed. She cut all communications from the mansion. At that moment, they heard a noise coming from Jack's room. Sarah ran there, finding him trying to get up, visibly disoriented. "Sarah," he mumbled, his eyes focusing on her with difficulty. "I remember your scent." "Why do I remember your scent?" "Jack, we need to get you out of here," she approached, helping him sit up. "Elizabeth is not who you think she is." "I know," he held his head in his hands. "The memories, they're coming back in flashes. The beach, you pregnant, the day that they took me." Footsteps in the hallway. Martha entered hurriedly. "Elizabeth is coming up with Dr. Carter. You need to get out of here now." Sarah helped Jack stand up, but his legs were too weak. "Lucas," he murmured. "Where's Lucas?" "With me," Martha replied, revealing the boy hidden behind her. "There's a service passage at the end of the corridor. It leads to the garage. The keys to the black Porsche are in the ignition." "You're not coming?" Sarah asked, noticing the housekeeper's hesitation. "Someone needs to delay them," Martha smiled sadly. "I've carried guilt for too long. It's time to do the right thing." They had barely reached the end of the corridor when they heard Elizabeth's furious scream. "Where are they?" "Run!" Martha ordered, closing the passage door behind them. The path to the garage seemed endless. Jack stumbled with every step, the effects of the sedative still strong in his system. Lucas surprisingly remained steady, helping to support his father. They finally reached the car. Sarah helped Jack into the passenger seat and put Lucas in the back. When she turned the key in the ignition, she heard the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades approaching. "You won't be able to escape," Elizabeth's voice echoed through the garage's sound system. "All exits are blocked." Sarah looked in the rearview mirror, seeing Lucas clinging to the seatbelt, his eyes wide with fear. Jack struggled to maintain consciousness, but his memories seemed to be returning faster and faster. "Ethan," he murmured. "Our other son, where's Ethan?" "Safe," Sarah replied, shifting the car into gear. "And we're going to be safe too." With a roar of the engine, she accelerated towards the garage gate. Elizabeth might have blocked the conventional exits, but Sarah had noticed something during her investigations. The back fence near the beach had a weaker section, damaged by the sea air. It was time to find out if a Porsche would be able to break through that fence. The Porsche cut through the back fence as if it were made of paper, landing on the sand with a dull thud. Sarah kept her foot firmly on the accelerator, taking advantage of the low tide to use the beach as an escape route. In the rearview mirror, she saw the helicopter make a sharp turn, following them. "Mom?" Lucas's voice trembled slightly. "The helicopter is coming down." Sarah glanced up quickly. The pilot was keeping the helicopter low, close enough for her to see Elizabeth in the passenger seat, her face contorted in a mask of fury. "Hold on!" Sarah shouted, swerving sharply to the right, entering a narrow trail between the trees. The helicopter wouldn't be able to follow them through the dense vegetation. Jack seemed more lucid with each minute, as if the adrenaline was helping to clear his system of the sedatives. "This trail," he murmured, "leads to the old marina. I remember coming here before everything." Sarah's cell phone regained signal as soon as they moved away from the mansion. Immediately, several messages from David started coming in. FBI alerted. Judge Rebecca Williams issued arrest warrants for Elizabeth and Institute directors. "We found documents linking the Institute to dozens of kidnappings. They're closing in. Be careful. Elizabeth has a private landing strip at the Morrison farm 20 miles north." Sarah felt a chill down her spine. The Morrison farm was exactly in the direction the trail was leading them. "We need to change route," she said, looking for an alternative exit among the trees. "There." Lucas pointed to a fork almost hidden by vegetation. "There's an old camping sign." Sarah turned the car at the last second, the tires skidding on the loose dirt. The trail led them to a clearing that served as a parking lot for an abandoned campground. "We can't continue by car," Sarah decided. "They must have blocked all the main roads." As if to confirm her suspicion, they heard the sound of engines approaching on the main trail. Quickly, they took only the essentials from the car: documents, water, and the cell phone. "I know this place," Jack said, his voice firmer now. "There's a fisherman's trail that leads to a village on the next beach. I used to come here with you." Sarah felt her heart race. His memories were returning faster and faster. As they made their way down the narrow trail, Sarah sent her location to David. The response came instantly. "Teams on the way. Stay out. Of open areas." Elizabeth called for reinforcements. Lucas surprisingly led the way with ease. "I dreamed of this place," he explained, when he noticed his parents' curious look. "Many times, but it wasn't a dream, it was a memory, wasn't it?" "Yes, son," Sarah replied, holding back tears. "You and your brother were born near here." The sound of the helicopter returned, approaching, but the tree canopy kept them hidden. They continued advancing along the trail until they reached a small cove. Some fishermen's houses were scattered along the beach, and a small wooden pier extended over the calm waters. "Sarah," Elizabeth's amplified voice echoed from the helicopter. "There's no way out. Lucas is my son. I gave him everything you could never offer." "She's wrong," Lucas said suddenly, his voice carrying a certainty beyond his 7 years. "You're my real mother. I always knew, deep in my heart." Jack hugged his son, his memories now flowing freely. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I wasn't there for you." "It wasn't your fault," Sarah replied, joining the embrace. "You were a victim too." The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching on the trail. Dr. Carter emerged from among the trees, followed by 2 armed men. "The game is over," he said, his voice cold. "Come with us now, and no one gets hurt." Sarah placed herself in front of Lucas and Jack. "No," her voice was firm. "Enough lies, enough manipulation. It's all documented now, the Institute, the illegal adoptions, the kidnappings." "You don't understand," Dr. Carter laughed bitterly. "The Institute is just the tip of the iceberg. There are very powerful people behind all this, people who can't have their names tarnished by scandals." At that moment, they heard sirens in the distance. Many sirens. "FBI!" A voice thundered from a megaphone. "The area is surrounded! Surrender!" Dr. Carter's face contorted in fury. He made a move towards his gun, but before he could reach it, a figure came running from the trail, knocking him down. It was Martha. "Run!" she shouted as she struggled with the doctor. "The police are coming from the beach." Sarah picked up Lucas and, along with Jack, ran towards the pier. Elizabeth's helicopter made one last attempt to block them, flying low over their heads. It was her fatal mistake. "Elizabeth Blackwell!" The voice on the megaphone boomed again. "Your helicopter is surrounded by snipers. Land immediately or we will be forced to take extreme measures." The sound of sirens was closer now. Through the vegetation, Sarah could see the red and blue lights approaching. The helicopter hovered in the air for a few seconds, like a cornered predator, before beginning a forced landing on the beach. Sarah hugged Lucas tightly as she watched FBI vehicles converging on the location, surrounding the aircraft from all sides. David emerged from one of the vehicles, accompanied by a woman with a severe expression whom Sarah recognized from the news, Judge Rebecca Williams, known for her fight against child trafficking. "Come out with your hands up," ordered a police officer through the megaphone. The helicopter door opened slowly. The pilot was the first to come out, hands raised. Elizabeth, however, remained inside the aircraft. "It's over, Elizabeth," Judge Rebecca shouted. "We have all the evidence, the Institute documents, the falsified medical records, the testimonies from other families." Finally, Elizabeth emerged from the helicopter. Her face, always so controlled, was transfigured by a mixture of fury and despair. "You don't understand," she screamed, walking on the sand with stumbling steps. "I gave love to Lucas, gave him a life he would never have. The Institute helps children find better families by kidnapping babies." Sarah's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Destroying families, drugging innocent people?" Jack took a step forward, his green eyes fixed on Elizabeth. 7 years, his voice trembled with contained anger. "You stole 7 years of our lives, every memory, every moment with my children." "I loved you," Elizabeth screamed, tears running down her face. "Everything I did was out of love." "This isn't love," Lucas said softly, his childish voice carrying wisdom beyond his years. "Love is what I feel here." He touched his heart. "When I look at my real mother, it's as if my heart always knew." At that moment, Martha emerged from the trail, escorted by 2 police officers. Her face was scratched from the fight with Dr. Carter, but her eyes shone with determination. "Mrs. Martha Oliveira," Judge Rebecca called, "your cooperation with the authorities will be taken into consideration, but you will still have to answer for your participation in the Institute's crimes." Martha nodded, accepting her fate. "I just asked that you consider that I tried to protect the children as best I could, and in the end I helped expose everything." Dr. Carter, handcuffed and with a cut on his forehead, was being put into a police car. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he vociferated. "The Institute has connections that go beyond what you imagine." "Oh, we know very well," David replied, approaching with a thick folder in his hands. "Every document, every bank transfer, every illegal agreement, it's all here. The Institute is no longer untouchable." Elizabeth, seeing herself cornered, made one last desperate move. She took something from her pocket, which the police would later discover was just a cell phone, and ran towards Lucas. It was her last mistake. 3 police officers immediately immobilized her as she screamed and struggled. "He's my son. Mine. You'll never be the mother I was, Sarah. Never." "No," Sarah replied calmly, hugging Lucas and holding Jack's hand. "I don't need to prove I'm a good mother. My children know who I am, and that's all that matters." As Elizabeth was being taken to the police car, Judge Rebecca approached the family. "The next few days will be intense," she warned. "We have a lot of work ahead of us to completely dismantle this organization, but you're safe now," David added. "I've already contacted a team to pick up Ethan. He'll be here in a few hours." Lucas, who had been quiet, suddenly became excited. "I'm going to meet my brother? My twin brother?" "Yes, dear," Sarah smiled through tears. "You'll never be separated again." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in orange hues. The police cars were leaving one by one, taking away the criminals who had stolen so many years of their lives. Martha, before getting into the police car, looked one last time at the family. "I'm sorry for everything," she said softly. "I hope one day you can forgive me." Jack, still processing his recovered memories, looked at the sea. So many lost years. "Not lost," Sarah corrected, intertwining her fingers with his. "Just postponed. We have all the time in the world now." Lucas, between the two, smiled. "And now we're a real family." But as they watched the last police car leave, Sarah couldn't help but notice a man in the distance on the beach, photographing the scene with a telephoto lens before quickly disappearing among the trees. The main battle might have ended, but something told her that the war against the Institute wasn't completely over yet. The sun had already set when David's car arrived at the beach, bringing Ethan and Mrs. Johnson. Sarah could barely contain her anxiety as she watched the two figures approaching on the sand. Lucas, by her side, squeezed her hand tightly. Time seemed to freeze when the twins saw each other for the first time. Ethan stopped halfway, his wide eyes fixed on his perfect reflection. Lucas took a step forward, hesitant. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the boys ran towards each other, meeting in a tight embrace in the middle of the path. "I knew it!" Ethan exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. "I always knew there was someone. I always felt like a part of me was missing." "Me too," Lucas sobbed, not letting go of his brother. "In my dreams I saw you, but I thought it was just imagination." Jack watched the scene with misty eyes, his memories now fully restored. Sarah approached, holding his hand. "They're identical," he murmured, amazed. "How could I forget? How could I let them take this away from me?" "It wasn't your fault," Sarah hugged him. "You were a victim too. The important thing is that we're together now." Mrs. Johnson, who watched the scene emotionally, approached with a gentle smile. "So this is the famous Lucas." Ethan wouldn't stop talking about his brother on the way here, said he could feel he was close to finding him. The twins were inseparable. Sitting on the sand, they shared stories, discovering all the coincidences in their separate lives, the love for building things, the same gestures, even the same fears. "Family," David called, approaching with some documents. "We need to resolve some practical issues. Judge Rebecca managed to expedite the custody regularization process and—" He was interrupted by an employee from the nearby hotel who approached, with an envelope in his hands. "Excuse me, but they left this at the reception for Mrs. Sarah Thompson." Sarah took the envelope cautiously. Inside was just a photo, the old headquarters of the New Dawn Institute, apparently abandoned. On the back, a handwritten message. "Not all secrets have been revealed. Some still need guardians. A.B." "What does it mean?" Jack asked, reading. Over her shoulder, David examined the photo carefully. The initials? Arthur Blackwell. Elizabeth's brother, who disappeared 10 years ago when he started investigating suspicious activities at the Institute. So he's alive. Sarah felt a shiver. "And apparently has more information," David completed. "But that's a battle for another day. Today is a day to celebrate the reunited family." And indeed, there was much to celebrate. The twins were now playing in the water, their laughter echoing across the night beach. Jack watched them with a serene smile, finally at peace with his recovered memories. 2 weeks later, the family moved to a beachfront house in a quiet coastal town. Ethan and Lucas shared a room full of Legos and unfinished construction projects. Jack, now completely free from the effects of the drugs, returned to work as a photographer, his old passion. Sarah continued teaching, but now at a school near their new home. On a Sunday morning, as the whole family had breakfast on the porch overlooking the sea, Ethan asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Mom, what if more bad people try to separate us again?" Sarah looked at her children, so alike and so unique in their own ways, and smiled. "No one will ever separate us again. Do you know why?" The twins shook their heads, curious. "Because true love always finds its way back. That's how your father came back to us. That's how you two found each other again. Some connections are too strong to be broken." Jack kissed her forehead while the boys went back to playing in the sand. The mysterious envelope was kept in a drawer, a reminder that there were still battles to be fought. But now they would face any challenge together, as the family they should always have been. On the beach, the twins were building another of their elaborate castles, their dark heads close together as they planned every detail. The sun shone on the calm sea, and the breeze brought promises of better days. Sarah knew that somewhere, Arthur Blackwell still held secrets that could shake the power structures that allowed the Institute to exist for so long. But that would be a story for another time. For now, she had everything she had ever dreamed. To have her children together, the love of her life back, and the certainty that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. After all, some stories don't really end. They just take a pause before the next chapter begins.